May I have your attention? Please welcome TechCrunch Senior Climate Writer Harry Weber and Connie Qian, Investor and Vice President of ForgePoint Capital.
How's everyone doing? Let the nice background music play a little longer maybe. But so glad to be here. Just to reiterate, my name is Harry Weber. I cover climate, I cover venture capital here at TechCrunch. All right, so Connie, you're at ForgePoint. You're a VP there. Previously, you were at Square, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
What did I miss? Will you just update us a little bit on what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an investor at ForgePoint Capital. We are a fund that's focused on the cybersecurity and infrastructure software sectors. We are focused on Series A and B investing primarily, although we do some seed and some growth co-investments as well.
So today we're talking about a few different things. We're talking about raising a Series A and how that compares to earlier rounds, the pre-seed, the seed, but also about those relationships, which I imagine can be a bit different. Can you talk a little bit about, is it more formal, or is it more sort of a buttoned up, you want a cloth napkin in your lap when you're at dinner kind of thing when you're raising a Series A? Obviously the startup world's pretty informal in general, but how, just on that, highest level, how are those things different? Going out to raise a seed, going out to raise a later stage round?
Yeah. I would still say at the early stage, Series A and B, it's still pretty informal. The biggest difference, I would say, is you're transitioning from, primarily selling your team, the idea you have, to being able to demonstrate that you have the building blocks in place to start scaling this as a company. And so what that means is that your Series A investors are going to want to see tangible signs that you found your product market fit. As you go even later stage, investors will become even more and more metrics driven. But at the Series A, I would still say that the team and the product that you have should be the highlights of the story, but you should start backing that up with tangible proof points like your ARR, your growth rate, your retention, customer testimonials, things like that to show that you can sell beyond just your friends and family.
Sure. Now that's true all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are very evergreen things. This year looks a little different than last year. The downturn, VCs are cutting fewer checks. How's that hitting the Series A raises?
Yeah, so Series A is definitely still happening. I think that, it all starts to trickle down from the public markets, right? So when you see those public market valuations get cut, the other rounds will slowly follow. With Series A, though, I would say you can expect investors to be a little bit more cautious in terms of the valuations they're willing to give. They might, have a little bit more involved in their due diligence process. But I wouldn't say it's, screeched to a halt or anything like that. You just have to be careful as you run your process, what milestones you're trying to hit. In a way, it shouldn't have changed your fundraising process. But what has changed is that you might not have an investor step in and throw you a term sheet before you finish editing your deck.
Sure. All right, so let's play just a hypothetical game here.
Sure.
You're a seed stage startup, or rather, you're a startup. You've got your company. You've raised some money. What would you rather go out and raise right now, a seed or a Series A? If you had to, which would you rather know?
I think that's entirely dependent on where you are at as a company. If you are in sort of still an ideation phase, you think you have targeted a problem you want to solve, but you're just a couple of folks, you should probably still just raise your seed. I think in the past year's craziness, some people went out and raised bigger rounds
Sure.
than they really needed to. I don't know if that was ever a good idea. But now, if you are at a stage where, you have some sales velocity, your customer counts are picking up, your core team is in place, then it's still the right time to raise a Series A.
Good. Just for a show of hands, is anyone here raising a seed? Anybody? All right, we got a few people, more than a few people. And then anyone here out raising an A or later stage round? I'd say almost equally between the two. What are some do's and don'ts just in general then for going out to raise? Let's say, I think actually, and we'll get to some questions later, and there'll be another QR code showing up here in a bit if you want to ask your own questions. But one of the questions was, I hate networking.
Yeah.
Do I really have to do that? That sounds so terrible, right? But it's just, and yet it's so crucial and important, and it's fun, it's exhausting. So what are the do's and don'ts there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody likes networking that much. I would say you should really prioritize building your company because the investors will always be there. When you have, the right product and the numbers to back it up, it will not be hard. Actually, the investors will probably find you before you're even going out to fundraise. That being said, I think a good do is if you do happen to know a couple of investors that you think would be promising for your next round, to spend some time with them to build trust. That way, when it is time for you to fundraise, they'll be more likely to come out and, be able to move quickly. They'll just be able to, help you out more. And like an example of a way to build trust is you should, talk about your business. It doesn't need to be transactional. See if they're excited about the idea. Maybe work in a couple of metrics that you're optimizing for, whether that's customer logos or, ARR growth or whatnot. And then when you start hitting those metrics over time, I think that builds a lot of trust.
Just real quick,
Yeah.
any the sort of more the do's, right?
Oh, you want some don'ts?
So don'ts. What any faux pas at sort of dinners or sort of things like that where it's a very specific world and it's sort of insulated. So I imagine breaking in is tricky, and you might want to avoid the big embarrassing moment. Have you had any of those? You don't have to tell me all the details, but have you had any of those?
I think the biggest don't is just don't fundraise if you're not ready for it. You should come prepared, know what some of your key milestones, when you hit them, what your customers are doing with your product. Just make sure you're ready. It's different for every company, but make sure wherever you are, you're ready for that fundraise when you start meeting investors. Don't spread it out over a period of 8 months where you're meeting one investor per month, because the reality is investors chat with each other all the time. And so I think it can be a problem if there's a perception that you've been out in the market for a really long time, when really it was just like an investor reached out to you and you had a conversation with them.
So sort of compressing that time.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't want to look like no one's interested. You don't want to look like you've been sitting. It's sort of like a house that's been on sale for too long.
Exactly.
What's wrong with it?
Exactly. It's like when you are applying for jobs, you want to make sure that you get all your offers around the same time.
So some people go to Stanford and then they've sort of got this golden spoon in their mouths. Personally, any Stanford people out here? We got a couple. All right, must be nice. So if you're not part of that world, I imagine it's got to be extra. I mean, it's tricky for everyone. Sorry, Stanford people, but if you're not part of that world, you're on the outside. Maybe you can find the emails. Maybe you can't. Of VCs you're trying to reach out to. I mean, how do you not appear too thirsty, or how do you not appear too desperate? Because you're ultimately asking for money.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you can do is just start with more casual interactions, like start with smaller regional events, get to know people who are working on, excited about similar ideas as you are. Do your research when you target a VC. So look at the stage that they typically invest. Look at the types of companies they've invested in the past. Those kind of things can be good indicators of how smoothly that conversation will go once you reach out. It's if you're super early stage and you reach out to someone who's writing $50 million checks, even if they take the meeting, there's probably not going to be a lot of overlap there. So I would just say, like, as long as you do your research and prioritize the people you reach out to, try to offer them some perspective they don't already know. I don't think you'll appear too thirsty.
Sure. Well, it seems like you play it cool, but not too cool, right? It's a moving target. It seems a little tricky. All right, so I got a few questions, but one thing I want to ask is, so ForgePoint, there's a pretty specific thesis around security and infrastructure.
Yeah.
Is it different in that world? I imagine, one thing I write about is climate change. More venture dollars are going there than perhaps some other areas just because everyone's thinking about it. I think there are a few other hot spots, and then there's some things. I think fintech might have been struggling a little bit this year because it had such crazy highs a few years ago. So what is it like being in that specific focus for anyone here who might be working on security, infrastructure, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so security is definitely a good spot to be in right now because, with the changing environment in terms of the macro, I think there's a general perception that, enterprise spending is going to slow down. But with security, you see all these headlines now with, ransomware, software vulnerabilities. It's really elevated those conversations to a point that people cannot really ignore. So I think that's going to be a more resilient area for customers to be spending on, as well as VCs who are looking to invest in companies that are growing.
I know Zach on our security team, he runs the desk, is constantly busy with the breaches to the extent that he's not really able to take take stories or embargoes or that sort of thing on security-focused startups, just because there's just too much. So I imagine there must be a lot of action there. Everyone's kind of, even in a downturn, we're worried.
Yeah.
Got to lock everything down. Another thing I wanted to talk about. Speaking of the downturn, for the 10,000th time. In some sectors, we were talking about how they're doing well, other sectors not so much. One thing that I saw that was troubling, and it's a very, very niche thing, but I suspect it's true everywhere else. PitchBook gave me some data that said that the percentage of money that was going to female founders had dropped this year. It was, I think it was, in the teens. And this was for a very specific sector. It was for agriculture, agriculture technology, which is a predominantly male-dominated, or largely male-dominated scene. So security, is that sort of the same deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge, huge problem in security. I definitely, this problem resonates a lot. I think even as an investor, there's not that many female investors out there. I think part of the onus is on investors to do a better job here. But one thing that I would say for the female founders out there is to figure out, find a career sponsor or mentor that can really help you in the weeds. I feel like the biggest issue with raising capital sometimes is if you don't have that context or that community, it can be a lot more challenging. So just to give you an example, one of our portfolio companies has the company's called Sphere. It has a female founder, and one of our current board members, who's been on the board for probably 8 years or something like that. He has at the early days was literally in the office helping her like 3 days a week. When this was back when they were bootstrapped, when we as ForgePoint did their Series A a couple of years ago, he and I literally built their first financial model together. So having that kind of hands-on help where the person has a lot of context too is incredibly, incredibly important.
You've set up a group too. You've got. I don't imagine it's taking everyone in. I don't know if it can fit every single person here, but you are doing some work in San Francisco building your own network. Could you talk about that and lessons you've learned from that?
Yeah, so I started a group called the Cyber Mavens. We're a group of female investors that look at cybersecurity, and we meet every couple of weeks to talk about the deals we're seeing. We talk about, like things that are going on in our jobs, and trends we see in the market. Basically, like anything, as well as share potential connections that we may have with one another. And so that's been sort of my version of what I was talking about earlier, having that support. One of the ways we're looking to broaden out is to host these events in San Francisco where we bring in operators as well. So if you're somebody who's building at a security company, or if you're an operator that works with security, let me know, because that's one of the ways we're looking to connect more with the community.
So we've got our Twitter, or I imagine maybe towards the end of the slide we'll have our Twitter handles up there, but yeah, please do get in touch. So I'm turning to the questions. Hopefully the Q&A will, let's see. Oh, well, there's the slide. There, everyone at us, and then this is what I really wanted, was the Q&A. So if you scan that with your phone, I promise it's relatively easy. You can ask a question, it'll show up here, and I'll decide whether to ask it or not. We've got some good questions here. We've got a couple very strange ones. One person asked, is climate change even real?
That's for you.
Yeah, well, it's very serious, yes. It's quite real. It's a downer topic, but I do care about it a lot. And so, anyways, what we're talking about here is we're building a company. You start a company, you own the whole thing. You need capital. You give a little piece up. I'm curious, how much equity? This is a question from Anonymous. It's a funny name. How much equity should I own after a Series A? And how about for my employee option pool? So yeah, just in general, like that process of deciding or understanding how much to give out.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different guidelines here, I would say. The first is to think about how much runway you'll need as a company. The general rule of thumb is that you raise a Series A, that funding should last you about 2 years. And you should be, able to communicate to your investors what milestones you want to hit in those 2 years. The other rule of thumb is just, from what we typically see, for a seed round, it's like 10 to 15% of the company tends to be sold, and then with the Series A, people tend to sell anywhere from 15 to 25%. So those are kind of just some guardrails of what you can expect. The reason you would choose to raise a smaller seed round as opposed to go straight to your Series A, though, is you don't really want to raise, again, more than you need. And that's because, founder dilution is really real. I think there's everyone knows that the valuation will affect your dilution, but the amount you raise also has a huge impact on it. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Sure. And one thing I wanted to, or did you have a thought to add?
I was going to answer the second part of your question.
Please.
So for the option pool, that's another thing where you can kind of work backwards. You can see what key hires you will need to grow your company. And then, so say you need a CRO, how many options do you think you'll need to allocate for that role? And then work backwards. So typically for a Series A, that ends up being like 15% of this share should be unallocated for future options, but it could range, like if you happen to, just be a 2-person team and you'll need to do a lot of hiring, that number might be more.
Sure, that makes sense. And one thing that I had wanted to ask, and I see that someone did ask a version of this question. Their question was, as a European founder waiting for the visa, how do you show commitment of moving here? Investors are asking for that. I think I'm curious about that question specifically, but also broadly. If you're not based in San Francisco, I imagine some people here are and some aren't. How do you break in? How do you show that you're for real about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of it is just trust. If you say, that's in your plan, like, as an investor, I would tend to believe that if we have a certain level of trust. One way to show that that's something you're working towards is where you're building out your team. If you're, hiring for certain roles in the area that you, closer to the area that you're looking to move, I think that's a good signal. And then, was there a second part of that question?
Well, I think, a European specific one, but that kind of makes me want to ask where your portfolio company's largely based.
Yeah, our portfolio companies are actually pretty distributed. We're based in the Bay Area, but a lot of our portfolio companies are actually spread around the United States, some in Canada, and then some in Europe. I think the reasons for moving from, say, Europe to the US is less about the investor and more about being able to attract your customers. So if you're the CEO of a Series A startup, you're the primary salesperson still, being close to your customers helps. And so I think that's what's, investors are kind of solving for if they ask, their portfolio companies to move.
So I see another question here. Reminder, please get them in. We've got a little bit of time left for questions. This one also from Anonymous. Let's say I'm fortunate, have interest from multiple investors. How do I manage that process? Maybe you're feeling really popular, but even then it's maybe a little bit overwhelming. So how do you juggle all that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great spot to be in. I think then you just have to do your research and see who you think is the best position to help your company grow. So like I mentioned before, one of the ways to do that is to look at, the different portfolio companies this investor already has, where they've shown interest, and, think about like the advice they've already given you through the process and how much that advice has been resonating. At the end of the day, I do think it's good to, whittle down to a couple of key value-add investors, because you don't want a situation where you have like too many cooks in the kitchen. And then, conversely, from an investor perspective, they'll be more motivated to help if they have more ownership in the company.
How many cooks are too many? You remember? I don't know if anyone remembers Too Many Cooks. That was like a funny, well, no, that's way too niche. But anyway, you can Google Too Many Cooks if you want to be upset. It's just a funny internet video. But how many cooks is too many?
I think it really depends on how involved some of them are. Like sometimes, you'll have a couple of seed investors, and then by the time you're raising your Series A, it's kind of like, well, they, helped you in the early stages, and then now, a Series A investor is going to come in, and it kind of like the involvement gets replaced. I would say, a handful, is probably a good idea. Like, say on a board, for instance, having 2 different investors is probably the most at this stage.
Really, just and then maybe a few other.
And then, and then
people who know the industry.
Right. I would definitely caution against, too much investor crowding.
What is that process like? Because I know you both invest and you play an operational role as well. Mm-hmm. What is that like when this, a tiny startup with just a few people starts to grow, and you need the board. You need, you start to add in. It gets more formal. You bring in more people. Are there growing pains there?
Yeah, there definitely are. And like as an investor, I actually spend time with my companies helping them get ready for board meetings and things like that. In terms of board composition, going back to the earlier question, I think it's just about getting a diversity of perspective. So, having someone who's maybe, if you're a first-time CEO, having a, long-time CEO sit on your board to provide some operational guidance and things like that. A customer persona certainly helps. But in terms of like the tactics of getting ready for a board meeting, I would say that you just have to remember that you're trying to get the most out of your board members as advisors too. So showing them both the good and the bad and where you are focused on, where you need help, make it easy for them to jump in and provide that kind of guidance through, board check-ins every, maybe 2 months or so.
I'm trying to interpret another question, not to blow through them too quickly.
Yeah.
But what makes a VC act is one question. Being interested, getting to a term sheet, is that really an answerable question? Because it seems so specific to each company. But are there certain things that you're like, yes, all right, now I know I'm in. I'm just curious what makes a VC say, yes, I want to invest.
So what gets a VC super excited, I guess?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of different things. At the Series A, again, it's still, a lot of it is, the problem that you're solving and how you're addressing it. So if you're able to show that you're solving a clear need in a very unique way, and you're doing so in a way that customers are going to pay for, maybe you help drive revenue at other businesses, things like that, I think get VCs really excited because there's also a timing element, right? There's a lot of problems out there, but what are the next problems that need to be addressed that customers will pay for? I think that's that timing element is what's tricky about investing, and it's what investors will ultimately be looking for.
We're hopping around a bit. That's sort of the nature of the Q&A. Thank you for sticking with me on this.
Yeah.
I just have a couple more here. I thought this was interesting. Do you have a perspective on how long a board member should stay on the board? They said after a while, this is from Sandra, they said after a while it seems to be declining value that an individual can add. So, do they overstay their welcome? How long?
I think there's kind of a natural transition that happens. For us, if we're doing, seed and Series A investments, we'll have sometimes a couple of board members. But when new investors come in, it's completely natural for someone to take a step back and for, the new investor to get a seat at the table. So I think there's, depending on the phase of the company, that is something that happens. And, as a CEO, you should be vocal if you want to keep your board at a certain size to avoid just growing it over time.
Just going through, we've got a couple seconds left. This is one last thing, just a strategy question. I imagine you come across it a lot. What functions or roles must I have hired by the time I raise a Series A? Are there certain green flags you look for, just as we run out the clock?
Yeah. So I would say as you're raising your Series A, you should have your core team in place. So what that means is that when you receive that extra capital, you're ready to hit the ground running and scale. So say like the Series A is for scaling sales and marketing, which it often is. Maybe you have like that VP of sales identified. Maybe you've already made a couple of those early hires on the sales and business side of things, and that your exec team is fully in place.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We're so thrilled to have you here. Thank you for watching, and that'll be it for this panel. But stay tuned for more. There are more coming.
Thank
All right,
you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.